Have you ever wondered why, despite your intelligence, your effort, your morality, and your endless consumption of advice, you are still being outplayed by people who seem smaller, colder, and far less sentimental than you? You walk through life believing you are awake, believing you see the world clearly, believing you are thinking for yourself, yet every day your reactions are predicted, your emotions are harvested, your loyalty is exploited, and your outrage is sold back to you as purpose. You mistake stimulation for understanding. You mistake noise for truth. You mistake comfort for safety. And in that confusion, power passes you by. Not because it is hidden, but because you were trained not to look directly at it. This is not an insult. This is a diagnosis. And Machiavelli would not soften it for you. He would look at you, as he once looked at princes and crowds and traitors and saints, and he would say that ignorance is not the absence of intelligence, but the refusal to see how humans actually behave when stripped of the stories they tell about themselves. You were raised on illusions carefully engineered to keep you harmless. You were taught that intention matters more than outcome, that morality protects you, that honesty is a shield, that fairness is a law of nature rather than a temporary agreement enforced only when it benefits those with teeth. You were taught to admire virtue without studying consequence, to respect authority without understanding its hunger, to trust systems that were never designed for your flourishing but for your compliance. You were taught to believe that if you work hard and remain good, the world will reward you. And every day the world proves otherwise, yet you call it bad luck instead of structure. Machiavelli did not write for dreamers. He wrote for those who noticed the pattern behind betrayal, the rhythm behind loyalty, the mechanical predictability of fear, ambition, envy, and desire. He wrote for those who understood that humans do not act according to what they claim to value, but according to what protects their status, their survival, and their sense of superiority. He understood something you were discouraged from learning early, that most people are not evil, but they are weak, and weakness makes them dangerous. Weak people lie to themselves first, then to you. Weak people cling to moral language while practicing ruthless self-preservation. Weak people resent strength, yet crave its protection. Weak people will betray you not out of malice, but out of fear of losing comfort. You call this hypocrisy. Machiavelli called it reality. You are surrounded by symbols designed to keep you distracted from leverage. You argue about ideas that have no power while ignoring behaviors that control outcomes. You obsess over being liked while others quietly engineer being needed. You broadcast your thoughts while others study silence as a weapon. You confess your intentions while others conceal theirs behind pleasant ambiguity. You think transparency makes you trustworthy, not realizing it makes you predictable. And predictability is the first step toward domination. Look closely at the world you live in. Power does not announce itself with cruelty. It smiles, it reassures, it offers safety. It uses your values as handles. It tells you that questioning it is immoral, that resisting it is dangerous, that thinking too deeply is cynical. It does not need to threaten you when it can recruit you to police yourself. You shame yourself into obedience. You censor your instincts. You suppress your ambition because you were taught to associate hunger with corruption and restraint with virtue. And while you starve your will, others feed theirs openly, unapologetically, strategically. Machiavelli would say you are not stupid because you lack intelligence. You are stupid because you trust narratives over incentives. You listen to words instead of watching actions. You believe promises instead of studying patterns. You evaluate people by how they want to be seen, not by what they do when they think no one is watching. You confuse emotional intensity with truth. You confuse confidence with competence. You confuse kindness with loyalty, and in doing so, you hand your fate to those who understand you better than you understand yourself. Human beings are not mysterious. They are repetitive. They are driven by fear of loss more than desire for gain. They will abandon principles when survival feels threatened. They will follow strength even when they condemn it publicly. They will punish honesty if it destabilizes their comfort. They will reward deception if it preserves their illusion of order. Machiavelli observed this not with bitterness, but with clarity. He did not ask what people should be. He asked what they are when the stakes are real. And what they are is emotionally reactive, status-obsessed, and deeply suggestible. You are taught to believe that manipulation is rare, practiced only by villains, yet manipulation is the default language of social interaction. Every compliment is a positioning move. Every apology is a negotiation. Every moral stance is a signal designed to attract allies and deter threats. You manipulate and are manipulated constantly, but you only condemn it when it is done poorly or against you. The successful manipulator is never accused because their control feels like choice, their influence feels like alignment, their dominance feels like safety. You want to believe that intelligence alone is enough, that if you are smart, you will see through lies. But intelligence without emotional discipline becomes a liability. Clever people are easier to manipulate because they overestimate their immunity. They think awareness equals protection. Machiavelli knew better. Awareness without strategy is entertainment. Knowledge without restraint is exposure. Insight without timing is suicide. The world does not reward truth. It rewards utility. Truth is only valuable when it serves power. Otherwise, it is ignored, punished, or reframed as hostility. You are taught to speak your truth as if the act itself carries force. But words without leverage are noise. Honesty without position is confession. And confession, in the wrong environment, is ammunition. Look at how leaders rise, not the ones celebrated in textbooks, but the ones who actually shape outcomes. They do not reveal their full intentions. They do not seek consensus before acting. They do not confuse popularity with control. They understand that people want to feel represented, not informed. They speak in symbols, not specifics. They offer enemies for the crowd to focus on while consolidating power elsewhere. They understand that fear unites faster than hope, and that controlled instability keeps people dependent. You think you are immune because you disagree with them, but disagreement does not equal independence. You are still playing on their field, reacting to their moves, absorbing their framing. Machiavelli would say that as long as you are emotionally triggered by a system, you are inside it. True autonomy begins when you can observe without flinching, when praise and condemnation lose their grip, when you can see advantage where others see only outrage. You were taught to value authenticity, to be yourself, to express freely. Machiavelli would ask a sharper question: which self, and for whose benefit? He understood that identity is a tool, not a confession. The self you present should be shaped by context, calibrated to outcome, and guarded fiercely. Those who expose everything call it courage. Those who win call it foolishness. Mystery creates gravity. Ambiguity creates space. Silence forces projection, and projection reveals more about others than they ever intended to show. You live in an age where exposure is mistaken for power, where visibility is confused with influence, where outrage is monetized and vulnerability is branded. You are encouraged to bleed publicly and call it connection. Machiavelli would laugh at this inversion. He knew that those who are hardest to read are hardest to control. He knew that the crowd loves access but fears distance. He knew that respect grows in the presence of restraint, not oversharing. You are not taught how to observe. You are taught how to react. You are not trained to sit in discomfort long enough to extract information. You rush to label, to judge, to align, to condemn. In doing so, you reveal your values, your triggers, your loyalties. You become legible, and legible people are manageable. Power is not loud. It is patient. It waits for you to exhaust yourself arguing while it builds quietly. It lets you believe you are winning because you are speaking. It lets you believe you are dangerous because you are angry. Meanwhile, it studies you. It catalogs your responses. It predicts your next move. And when it acts, it feels inevitable, as if no other outcome was possible. That is not destiny. That is design. Machiavelli understood that most suffering is not caused by cruelty but by miscalculation, by assuming others think as you do, by projecting your morality onto those who see it as weakness, by mistaking civility for safety, by believing that good intentions protect you from bad actors. The world is not divided between good and evil. It is divided between those who see clearly and those who prefer comforting lies. You were told that cynicism is dangerous, that skepticism erodes trust, that questioning motives makes you bitter. Machiavelli would counter that blind trust makes you disposable. He did not hate people. He studied them. He saw how quickly loyalty dissolves when incentives change. He saw how easily crowds turn on yesterday's hero. He saw how fear rewrites values overnight, and instead of lamenting it, he adapted to it. You think manipulation is something done to you. Machiavelli saw it as something always happening, whether consciously or not. The difference between being controlled and being strategic is not morality, but awareness and choice. When you refuse to understand manipulation, you do not escape it. You become its raw material. There is a reason you feel exhausted, confused, and perpetually behind. You are fighting shadows while others move pieces. You are debating ethics while others calculate outcomes. You are expressing feelings while others build leverage. You are waiting for fairness in a game that rewards foresight. And when you lose, you call it injustice rather than ignorance. Machiavelli would not insult you. He would challenge you. He would tell you that your discomfort is the cost of waking up, that the pain you feel when illusions crack is the sound of dependency breaking, that the anger you feel when power is exposed is the residue of having been managed without consent. He would tell you that the world has always been this way, and that the only thing that changes is who understands it. You can continue believing that clarity is cruelty, that strategy is corruption, that power is evil, or you can accept that power is neutral, that it amplifies intention, and that ignorance only ensures it will be wielded against you. Machiavelli did not promise peace. He promised lucidity. He did not offer comfort. He offered control. And control begins not with dominating others, but with mastering the instinct to look away when truth threatens identity. It begins with the willingness to see yourself not as the hero of a moral story, but as a participant in a competitive reality where outcomes matter more than intentions. It begins when you stop asking how the world should work and start studying how it does. This is not about becoming cruel, it is about becoming precise. It is about understanding that kindness without boundaries invites exploitation, that honesty without strategy invites destruction, that virtue without power is decoration. Machiavelli's mind is not a place of hatred, it is a place of clarity so sharp it cuts through fantasy. And once you see the pattern, once you feel the chill of recognition, once you realize how much of your life has been shaped by forces you never questioned, you will understand why ignorance is not innocence. It is vulnerability disguised as virtue. Once the illusion cracks, it does not shatter loudly. It seeps. It leaks into your perception like a slow poison, altering the taste of everything you once trusted. Conversations sound different. Smiles look rehearsed. Praise feels conditional. You begin to notice the gap between what people say and what they protect, and in that gap, Machiavelli waits, not as a villain, not as a savior, but as a mirror that does not flinch when you look into it. You start to understand that society is not held together by shared values, but by negotiated fears. Order is not moral, it is convenient. Stability is not virtuous, it is profitable. The rules you were taught to revere were not carved into stone by wisdom, but drafted by power to preserve itself. Machiavelli saw this clearly because he watched republics rot from the inside while still preaching virtue, watched leaders swear loyalty while sharpening knives, watched crowds chant ideals while begging for someone strong enough to decide for them. He learned early that people do not want freedom. They want relief from responsibility. This is where your education failed you. You were taught that people seek truth. They do not. They seek certainty. Truth is disruptive. It destabilizes identity. Certainty calms anxiety, and those who can provide certainty, even if it is false, command devotion. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who hesitates to lie when necessary will be destroyed by those who lie without hesitation, not because lying is noble, but because reality does not reward hesitation in environments where deception is already normalized. You feel uncomfortable reading this, because part of you still wants to believe that exposure is enough, that revealing corruption defeats it. But exposure without consequence only educates better predators. Machiavelli would tell you that scandals do not destroy power, miscalculation does. Power survives shame, it collapses only when leverage disappears. You live in a time where everything is exposed and nothing changes. That is not progress. That is adaptation by those who rule you. Consider how quickly outrage fades, how easily yesterday's betrayal becomes today's background noise, how rapidly moral panic cycles reset. This is not because people are evil, it is because attention is finite and fear is exhausting. Machiavelli understood that time is the ally of the powerful. They wait for you to tire. They let you burn emotional energy while they conserve strategic patience. And when you move on, they remain. You were taught that consistency is integrity. Machiavelli knew that rigidity is fragility. Those who survive are not those who kill. Cling to fixed identities, but those who adapt without apologizing. The world punishes those who refuse to evolve, not because evolution is good, but because stagnation is exploitable. Predictable people are easy to corner. Flexible people are harder to trap. This is why ideology is dangerous when it replaces observation. Once you decide who you are in absolute terms, you limit the moves you are willing to make, and in a competitive environment, limitation is a gift to your adversaries. You cling to labels because they feel grounding: good person, honest person, loyal person. These identities soothe the ego, but they also broadcast constraints. Machiavelli would warn you that announcing your virtues publicly is equivalent to announcing your weaknesses privately. Those who know what you refuse to do know exactly how to pressure you. They know where you will hesitate. They know when you will fold. They know how to frame their demands so that resistance feels immoral to you. This is how manipulation works at its highest level. It does not force, it invites, it frames. It presents a situation where your values become the leash. You are not coerced, you are compelled by your own identity. And you call this consent. Machiavelli studied fear not as a blunt instrument, but as a sculpting tool. He knew that terror breaks systems, but controlled fear builds them. People who are slightly afraid are attentive. People who are moderately afraid are obedient. People who are extremely afraid become unpredictable. The art is calibration. Too much pressure and rebellion ignites. Too little and complacency spreads. Power survives in the narrow band where people feel threatened enough to comply, but hopeful enough to endure. You were taught that leadership is about inspiration. Machiavelli saw that inspiration fades, but fear remembers. He did not advise cruelty for pleasure. He advised decisiveness for survival. Uncertainty breeds contempt. Hesitation invites challenge. A leader who is loved but weak becomes a liability to himself and everyone around him. A leader who is respected, even if feared, maintains order. This is not a moral endorsement. It is a psychological observation. Your mistake is thinking you can opt out of this reality by disapproving of it. Disapproval does not change incentives. Ethics do not override biology. Humans evolved to respond to dominance cues long before they developed moral philosophy. You can condemn this instinct, but it will still operate beneath your ideals. Machiavelli did not waste time judging instincts. He studied how they could be triggered, redirected, and exploited. You are taught to seek harmony. Machiavelli understood that conflict is inevitable, and pretending otherwise only ensures you are unprepared when it arrives. Those who anticipate conflict choose the terrain. Those who deny it fight on ground selected by their enemies. Peace is not the absence of tension. It is the management of it, and management requires awareness, not denial. Look at how alliances form. Rarely around shared values, often around shared enemies. Unity is easier to build against something than for something. This is why leaders manufacture threats, not always because the threats are real, but because fear binds faster than hope. Machiavelli saw this pattern centuries ago, and it has not changed because human psychology has not changed. Technology accelerates it but does not transform it. You want to believe that truth spreads naturally, that light dissolves darkness, but information does not liberate by default. It overwhelms, and overwhelmed people retreat into tribes, slogans, and authority figures who promise simplicity. Machiavelli understood that controlling narrative is more powerful than controlling facts. Facts require interpretation. Narratives supply meaning. Whoever controls meaning controls behavior. This is why power speaks in stories. Stories bypass logic and embed themselves in identity. Once an idea becomes part of who someone believes they are, attacking it feels like an attack on their existence. Machiavelli knew that you cannot defeat an identity with evidence. You must either replace it or render it irrelevant. And replacing identities requires patience, symbolism, and timing, not argument. You are encouraged to debate endlessly. Debate gives the illusion of agency without threatening structure. As long as you argue within the permitted frame, nothing changes. Machiavelli would tell you that real power moves quietly, often invisibly, shaping conditions so that outcomes appear natural. The most effective manipulation feels like common sense. The most durable control feels like tradition. You mistake legality for legitimacy. Laws are tools, not truths. They are written by those who win conflicts and enforced by those who benefit from stability. Machiavelli observed that laws follow power, not the other way around. When power shifts, laws change. This does not make law meaningless, but it makes it contingent. And those who treat it as sacred rather than strategic are often crushed by those who treat it as flexible. You were taught that ambition is dangerous. Machiavelli knew that suppressed ambition does not disappear. It rots, it turns inward, it manifests as resentment, sabotage, and moral posturing. Societies that shame ambition produce hypocrites, not saints. Individuals who deny their hunger become bitter spectators to others' success. Machiavelli did not encourage reckless ambition. He encouraged conscious ambition, disciplined by realism rather than fantasy. You are uncomfortable with dominance because you associate it with abuse. But dominance exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Someone always sets the terms. Someone always decides what is acceptable. The only question is whether it is explicit or disguised. Machiavelli preferred explicit power because it could be negotiated with. Hidden power pretends to be neutral while shaping everything. You believe that manipulation requires intelligence. Often, it requires only emotional control. Those who can regulate their reactions already have an advantage over those who cannot. Anger, guilt, shame, pride, these are levers. When you react impulsively, you reveal which levers work on you. Machiavelli would tell you that emotional discipline is not repression, it is concealment. You feel everything. You reveal nothing until it serves you. You are encouraged to express yourself constantly. Expression feels freeing, but it is also revealing. Silence is not emptiness, it is space. Space forces others to fill it, and in doing so, they expose themselves. Machiavelli valued silence because it creates asymmetry. The one who knows more than they reveal holds advantage. Transparency feels moral, but asymmetry wins games. You are taught to forgive quickly. Machiavelli understood mercy as a strategic resource, not a reflex. Forgiveness without memory is permission. Mercy without boundaries is invitation. He advised that injuries, when necessary, should be inflicted decisively, not repeatedly. Lingering harm breeds revenge. Clean resolution, even if harsh, stabilizes. This is not cruelty, it is containment. You assume that people remember favors. They remember how favors made them feel. Gratitude fades. Obligation resents. Machiavelli observed that people repay benefits when it costs them nothing. When it costs them something, they forget. This is not because they are wicked, but because self-interest overrides sentiment under pressure. Those who build strategy on gratitude build on and you want to be respected for who you are. Machiavelli would ask what you represent. Respect is not granted to essence. It is granted to utility and consequence. People respect those who can affect outcomes, protect resources, or impose costs. Love is fickle. Respect endures. And fear, when calibrated, stabilizes respect. Not terror, but the quiet understanding that crossing you has consequences. You are told that power corrupts. Machiavelli would say that power reveals. It amplifies what is already there. Those who become monsters under power were already monstrous in desire. Those who become disciplined were already disciplined in restraint. The danger is not power itself, but ignorance of its effects. Those who deny wanting power are often the most dangerous when they get it because they are unprepared for its weight. You live among people who claim to hate control while constantly seeking it over others through moral pressure, social exclusion, and narrative dominance. Machiavelli saw that control wears many masks. Some hold swords, others hold stories. Some rule through fear, others through guilt, but all rule through understanding human weakness. This is the uncomfortable truth you are avoiding. You are not surrounded by villains. You are surrounded by incentives. People respond to what is rewarded and avoid what is punished. Change the incentives and behavior follows. Ignore them and you will forever be shocked by predictable outcomes. Machiavelli did not ask you to abandon your values. He asked you to stop confusing values with strategies. Values guide intention. Strategy determines survival. Without survival, values are irrelevant. Without power, virtue is decoration admired briefly before being swept aside. You feel resistance rising because part of you fears what this knowledge implies. Responsibility. If the world operates this way, you can no longer hide behind ignorance. You can no longer claim surprise. You can no longer outsource blame to fate or morality. You must choose whether to remain naive or become literate in power. This literacy is not about domination for its own sake. It is about defense as much as offense. Those who refuse to understand manipulation are always manipulated. Those who refuse to understand power are always ruled. Machiavelli did not promise happiness, he promised agency, and agency is heavier than comfort. As this realization settles, you begin to feel the weight of your own participation. The moments you stayed silent when you should have observed. The times you spoke when you should have waited. The alliances you trusted because they felt good rather than because they were stable. The conflicts you avoided because they threatened your self-image. None of this makes you weak, it makes you human. But remaining unaware makes you predictable. Machiavelli's mind is not a refuge, it is a training ground. It strips you of illusions not to humiliate you, but to sharpen you. To teach you that the world does not owe you fairness, but it responds to competence. That morality without leverage is vulnerability. That clarity, once gained, cannot be ungained. And as you stand in this colder understanding, you begin to sense that this is only the beginning. That seeing the mechanics is one thing. Learning to move within them without losing yourself is another. The darkness is not outside, it is the shadow cast by reality when you finally stop looking away. Once you accept that the world moves on incentives rather than ideals, another realization emerges, colder and more unsettling. Most people do not want to see this truth, and those who do are quietly resented for it. Clarity is not welcomed, it is threatening. It destabilizes the fragile agreements people make with themselves to justify their choices, their failures, their submission. When you begin to see patterns instead of personalities, structures instead of stories, you step outside the emotional consensus that keeps social reality intact. And that distance has a cost. Machiavelli understood isolation long before it became a psychological term. He knew that those who see too clearly are often pushed to the margins, not because they are wrong, but because they disrupt the comfort of collective illusion. Most people do not want power explained. They want power personalized, moralized, dramatized into heroes and villains, so they can participate emotionally without accepting responsibility. To speak of power as mechanics is to remove the theater. And without theater, many feel naked. This is why the most dangerous thing you can do is not to oppose power, but to understand it. Opposition creates friction. Understanding creates asymmetry. When you oppose, you announce yourself. When you understand, you disappear. Machiavelli valued invisibility not as cowardice, but as strategic patience. Those who rush to declare their stance satisfy the ego but sacrifice position. Those who wait, watch, and withhold reveal nothing while gathering everything. You begin to notice how often people expose themselves without realizing it. They speak when silence would protect them. They reveal preferences before leverage is established. They express outrage before understanding the full board. They mistake emotional release for action. Machiavelli would see this not as passion, but as leakage. Every uncontrolled reaction is a transfer of power to whoever is calm enough to observe it. The modern world amplifies this weakness. You are encouraged to react instantly, publicly, permanently. To take positions before you have information, to define yourself loudly so others know where to place you. This is not empowerment. It is categorization. Once categorized, you can be predicted. Once predicted, you can be steered. Machiavelli knew that the fastest way to lose power is to become easily understood. He understood something else that disturbs you deeply. People do not resent domination as much as they resent exclusion from it. They will tolerate control if they feel aligned with it. They will excuse cruelty if it is directed outward. They will justify injustice if it benefits their group. This is why crowds rally behind leaders who violate their stated values but validate their identity. Loyalty is rarely about principle, it is about belonging. You want to believe you are different, that you stand apart from this instinct. But watch how quickly your judgment softens when someone you identify with behaves badly. Watch how aggressively you rationalize their actions. Watch how fiercely you attack those who threaten your group's narrative. Machiavelli would not shame you for this. He would note it, file it away, and use it if necessary. He understood that humans are not governed by logic, but by meaning. Meaning is emotional. It is constructed through stories that explain suffering, justify hierarchy, and promise redemption. Whoever controls these stories does not need to command directly. People will enforce them on each other. This is the most efficient form of control because it feels voluntary. You see this everywhere once you stop resisting the insight. Social pressure disguised as virtue, moral language used to enforce conformity, shame deployed as a disciplinary tool, praise rationed to reward obedience, punishment outsourced to the collective, so no single authority appears responsible. Machiavelli recognized this dynamic in religious institutions, political movements, and courts of power long before it acquired modern names. He knew that fear of social death is often stronger than fear of physical harm. This is why reputation matters more than truth in most environments. Truth is abstract. Reputation is tangible. It affects access, opportunity, and safety. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear virtuous even when acting otherwise because perception shapes reality more reliably than fact. This advice makes you uncomfortable because it forces you to confront how often you judge surfaces rather than substance, symbols rather than consequences. You say you value authenticity, yet you punish those who disrupt the image you prefer. You claim to admire honesty, yet recoil when it threatens your sense of order. Machiavelli saw that people ask for truth the way they ask for entertainment. They want it thrilling, not destabilizing. The moment truth demands sacrifice, it becomes unwelcome. This is where ambition enters the picture, not as greed, but as direction. Ambition is simply the refusal to drift. It is the decision to shape outcomes rather than endure them. Machiavelli saw ambition as inevitable. The question was not whether people desired advancement, but whether they acknowledged it. Those who deny their ambition do not eliminate it. They displace it into resentment, moral superiority, or passive aggression. Those who accept it can discipline it. Undisciplined ambition is reckless. Disciplined ambition is quiet. It plans, it waits, it accepts temporary obscurity in exchange for long-term position. Machiavelli admired those who could endure invisibility without becoming bitter, who could serve without surrendering their inner sovereignty. He knew that timing is everything. Acting too early exposes you. Acting too late erases you. The art lies in sensing when the environment is ripe and when it is hostile. You were taught that patience is passive. Machiavelli knew it as active restraint. It is the ability to delay gratification without losing. Focus. To observe cycles. To recognize when emotions are high and reason is low. To let others exhaust themselves while you conserve strength. This is not laziness, it is efficiency. As you internalize this, another illusion dissolves, the belief that power is held only by those at the top. Machiavelli understood power as relational. It exists wherever dependence exists. If someone needs something you control, you have power. If you need something they control, they have power. Most people misjudge their position because they do not map dependencies. They focus on titles rather than leverage. This is why people feel powerless even when they are not. They do not recognize what others need from them. They give freely without recognizing the exchange. They offer loyalty without securing reciprocity. They provide value without establishing consequence. Machiavelli would tell you that generosity without strategy is self-erasure. Giving should strengthen position, not weaken it. You were taught that asking for something in return is selfish. Machiavelli knew that unreciprocated giving breeds contempt. Those who receive without cost do not value the source. They grow accustomed, entitled, and when the giving stops, they turn hostile. This is not ingratitude as a moral flaw. It is adaptation to an environment where resources appeared free. Change the terms and behavior changes. This extends to emotional labor as well. You listen, you support, you empathize, and you expect that to matter. But unless boundaries exist, it becomes invisible. Machiavelli would advise that even kindness must be structured, not to eliminate compassion, but to preserve it. Without structure, it is consumed. You begin to see that much of what you were taught to admire is performative. Public virtue, loud outrage, dramatic sacrifice. These displays attract attention but rarely change structures. Machiavelli favored results over recognition. He knew that history remembers outcomes, not intentions. Those who crave applause often sacrifice effectiveness for visibility. Those who value control accept obscurity. There is a reason truly powerful figures often appear dull, unremarkable, even boring. They are not feeding on attention. They are managing systems. Attention is a resource, and it attracts competition. Machiavelli advised avoiding unnecessary attention because it invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites challenge. Challenge destabilizes position. The wise move quietly. You resist this because you were taught that silence equals complicity. Machiavelli would counter that noise often equals impotence. Speaking without leverage changes nothing. Acting without preparation destroys you. Silence is not submission when it is chosen. It is camouflage. As you absorb this, you may feel a creeping sense of paranoia. You start to question motives, to doubt appearances, to suspect manipulation everywhere. Machiavelli would caution against this extreme. Cynicism without discrimination is blindness of another kind. Not everyone is a strategist. Not every gesture is calculated. Most people are inconsistent, driven by impulse rather than design. The danger lies not in seeing manipulation everywhere, but in failing to recognize it where it matters. This requires calibration. Knowing when to trust and when to verify, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to reveal and when to conceal. Machiavelli's mind was not one of constant suspicion, but of selective attention. He watched what others ignored. He ignored what others obsessed over. You start to understand why moral absolutism is so appealing and so dangerous. It simplifies complexity. It offers certainty in a chaotic world. It divides reality into clean categories. But power operates in gray zones. Absolutes are brittle. They break under pressure. Those who cling to them either shatter or become hypocrites to survive. Machiavelli preferred adaptability to purity, not because purity is bad, but because it is fragile. In environments of conflict, fragility is fatal. Adaptability allows you to maintain core intent while adjusting surface behavior. This distinction is crucial. Principles guide direction. Tactics change with terrain. Confusing the two leads to ruin. You begin to see how often people sabotage themselves by confusing honesty with exposure. They reveal plans prematurely. They share vulnerabilities indiscriminately. They mistake being known for being valued. Machiavelli would advise that vulnerability is not a currency to be spent freely. It should be invested where trust has been tested and incentives aligned. Trust itself takes on a different meaning. It is no longer blind faith. It is calculated confidence based on observed behavior over time. Machiavelli trusted patterns, not promises. He knew that consistency under pressure reveals character more reliably than eloquence under comfort. Words are cheap. Reactions are expensive. You notice how often people pledge loyalty when nothing is at stake. How quickly that loyalty evaporates when costs appear. Machiavelli advised building systems that do not rely on virtue alone. He believed in aligning self-interest with desired behavior. If loyalty benefits the individual, it endures. If it requires sacrifice without compensation, it dissolves. This is why effective leaders do not ask people to be better than they are. They design structures that channel existing motives toward desired outcomes. This is not cynicism, it is realism. Expecting people to transcend their nature is a gamble. Building systems that work with that nature is strategy. You were taught to lead by example. Machiavelli would say example matters, but enforcement matters more. Without consequence, example becomes theater. People admire it and ignore it. Authority that cannot impose cost is symbolic. Symbols inspire briefly. Power stabilizes. As these ideas integrate, you feel the weight of a difficult question: what now? Once illusions are stripped away, what remains? Machiavelli did not leave you in nihilism. He offered a framework. Understand reality. Accept human nature. Act with intention. Preserve your core while navigating the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. This path is lonely because it requires restraint in a culture addicted to expression. It requires patience in an environment obsessed with immediacy. It requires discipline where indulgence is normalized. But it offers something rare: agency. Not the illusion of choice, but the capacity to shape outcomes deliberately. You are not asked to abandon compassion, but to armor it. Not to reject morality, but to anchor it in strength. Not to dominate for pleasure, but to understand dominance, so you are not crushed by it unknowingly. Machiavelli's darkness is not cruelty. It is clarity without anesthetic. And as you stand deeper inside this understanding, you realize that knowledge alone is not enough. Seeing the board does not mean you know how to move. Understanding psychology does not mean you can master your own. The next descent will be more personal, more uncomfortable, because it will force you to confront not just how others manipulate, but how you are manipulated by your own desires, fears, and need for validation. The world outside is only half the battlefield. The other half is inside you. And Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous enemy is not the tyrant, the rival, or the crowd, but the part of you that craves comfort more than control, approval more than autonomy, and certainty more than truth. The moment you turn inward, the tone shifts. The world does not grow quieter, but its noise loses authority. You begin to recognize that the most effective forms of control were never imposed from the outside. They were cultivated inside you patiently, invisibly, until they felt like your own voice. Machiavelli understood this before psychology had language for it. He knew that domination reaches its highest form when the subject becomes the warden of their own prison. You were taught to fear external enemies while internalizing restraints that required no enforcement. You learned what was acceptable to want, how loudly to want it, when to apologize for wanting at all. You learned to equate restraint with goodness and ambition with shame, and slowly you outsourced your will. You began to police yourself more efficiently than any ruler ever could. Machiavelli would not comfort you here. He would ask why you accepted this bargain so easily. The answer is uncomfortable, because it offered safety, because submission wrapped in moral language feels cleaner than risk wrapped in responsibility, because obedience promises belonging, while autonomy threatens isolation. Humans will trade freedom for certainty long before they admit they have done so. You begin to see how deeply this conditioning runs. Every time you hesitate to speak a truth because it might disrupt harmony. Every time you dilute your ambition so it does not threaten others. Every time you accept less than you want so you can still be liked. These are not isolated choices, they are patterns, and patterns become identity. Machiavelli saw identity as the most powerful leash ever invented. Once people define themselves rigidly, they become predictable. They defend the label even when it harms them. They choose consistency over effectiveness. They sacrifice opportunity to maintain an image. And they call this integrity. But integrity without power is fragility disguised as virtue. It shatters under pressure and leaves nothing but resentment behind. Machiavelli did not argue against principles. He argued against worshipping them blindly. Principles should guide action, not replace judgment. When principle becomes performance, it stops protecting you and starts exposing you. You were taught that self-control means suppression. Machiavelli understood it as direction. Suppression creates pressure. Direction creates leverage. When you deny desire, it leaks out sideways as bitterness, sabotage, or moral superiority. When you acknowledge desire, you can shape it, you can delay it, you can deploy it strategically. Denial makes you reactive. Awareness makes you dangerous. This is where most people retreat. They prefer to believe they are selfless rather than confront the reality of their hunger. They mistake denial awareness for moral elevation. Machiavelli would tell you that those who claim to want nothing are the easiest to manipulate because they do not understand what moves them. If you do not know your price, others will discover it for you. Look honestly at your motivations: recognition, security, influence, belonging, control. These are not sins, they are engines. Ignoring them does not shut them down. It hands the steering wheel to whoever understands them better than you do. Machiavelli believed self-knowledge was the foundation of all strategy. Without it, you are fighting blind. You begin to realize how often you act not from conviction, but from fear of loss, fear of status, fear of approval, fear of exclusion, fear of being wrong, fear of being alone. These fears whisper instructions constantly. They shape your tone, your posture, your decisions. They keep you small while convincing you that you are being virtuous. Machiavelli saw fear as a currency. Those who control fear control behavior. But he also understood that fear unmanaged turns inward. It paralyzes, it fragments, it erodes clarity. The goal is not to eliminate fear, but to master it, to feel it without obeying it, to let it inform judgment rather than dictate action. This requires something you are rarely taught: emotional discipline, not emotional suppression, but emotional containment. The ability to experience intensity without broadcasting it, to feel anger without reacting, to feel desire without confessing, to feel uncertainty without seeking immediate relief. Those who lack this discipline bleed information constantly. Their emotions announce their vulnerabilities. Machiavelli prized composure because it creates asymmetry. When you are calm and others are not, you see more, you hear more, you choose more freely. When you react impulsively, you surrender initiative. The one who controls tempo controls the encounter. Speed is not power, control is. You were taught that authenticity requires expression. Machiavelli would ask what you gain by being legible. Expression without context is exposure. Exposure invites exploitation. Mystery, when deliberate, is not deceit, it is protection. You are not obligated to reveal your inner world to those who have not earned access. Privacy is not secrecy, it is sovereignty. This is where many confuse manipulation with strategy. Strategy is not about deceiving others constantly. It is about deciding what is revealed, when, and to whom. It is about understanding that information is a resource. Spend it carelessly, and you impoverish yourself. Invest it wisely, and it compounds. You begin to see how often people sabotage themselves by over-explaining. They justify. They defend. They narrate their intentions in real time. They believe this builds trust. Often, it builds leverage for others. Machiavelli understood that explanations weaken authority. Decisions followed by silence appear deliberate. Decisions followed by justification appear uncertain. Certainty, even when partially constructed, commands obedience. Hesitation invites challenge. This is not because people love tyranny, but because ambiguity creates anxiety. Machiavelli knew that people prefer flawed clarity to honest uncertainty. This is why decisive leaders rise even when wrong. They offer relief from doubt. You were taught to value humility. Machiavelli valued confidence calibrated by realism. False humility invites disrespect. Arrogance invites revolt. The balance lies in quiet certainty backed by capability. Not loud claims, but consistent outcomes. Not declarations of strength, but demonstrations of consequence. As you internalize this, you confront another uncomfortable truth. Much of what you call morality is actually risk aversion. You avoid confrontation and call it peace. You avoid ambition and call it contentment. You avoid responsibility and call it balance. Machiavelli would not condemn you for this. He would note it, and then he would remind you that avoiding risk does not eliminate danger. It simply delays it until you are weaker. The world does not punish passivity immediately. It erodes you slowly. Opportunities pass quietly. Influence diminishes invisibly. Respect fades subtly. And one day you realize that decisions are being made without you, about you. That is not oppression. It is consequence. Machiavelli understood that power must be maintained, not obtained once and forgotten. Position decays without reinforcement. He meant, influence dissipates without presence. Control weakens without vigilance. This is not paranoia, it is maintenance. Those who assume stability is permanent are always shocked when it collapses. You begin to see why Machiavelli distrusted comfort. Comfort dulls perception. It lulls you into believing the environment is static. It convinces you that tomorrow will resemble today. But systems shift, alliances change, incentives realign. Those who do not adapt are outpaced. Adaptation does not mean abandoning self, it means refining it, strengthening it, learning when to push and when to yield, when to speak and when to watch, when to act and when to wait. This discernment is what separates strategy from impulse. You are taught to follow your feelings. Machiavelli would advise studying them instead. Feelings are signals, not instructions. They indicate pressure points. They reveal attachments. They expose vulnerabilities. When you obey them blindly, you are steered. When you observe them, you steer. This is the core of inner dominance, not domination of others, but mastery of self. Without it, external power corrupts because it amplifies chaos inside you. With it, power becomes a tool rather than a temptation. Machiavelli feared rulers who lacked self-control more than those who lacked compassion. Unrestrained desire destabilizes everything it touches. You begin to recognize moments in your life where a single disciplined pause would have changed everything, where silence would have preserved leverage, where restraint would have prevented damage, where patience would have revealed the truth. These realizations sting, but Machiavelli would tell you that regret is a teacher if you listen without self-pity. Self-pity is indulgence disguised as reflection. It keeps you focused on emotion rather than correction. Machiavelli valued learning over lamentation. The PA's key cannot be altered, but it can be mined. Every mistake contains information. Extract it and move forward. Do not perform remorse. Integrate lesson. As this integration deepens, you feel a subtle shift. You become less reactive, less eager to declare, less desperate to be seen. You begin to understand the power of being underestimated. When others think you are harmless, they reveal more. They guard less. They move carelessly. Machiavelli considered this a gift. He also understood the danger of isolation. Clarity can make you contemptuous. Distance can turn into arrogance. Strategy without connection becomes sterile. Humans are social animals. Power without allies is brittle. The goal is not detachment, but selective attachment. Choose alliances consciously. Maintain them strategically. Do not confuse warmth with loyalty. Loyalty is tested under cost. Machiavelli trusted those whose incentives aligned with his survival, not those who spoke beautifully, not those who shared his values, those who had something to lose if he fell. This is not coldness, it is prudence. You begin to see that the deepest manipulation you ever endured was the belief that wanting more made you bad. That strength was suspect, that control was corrupt. This belief kept you tame, manageable, predictable. Machiavelli would call it a brilliant strategy executed by no single strategist, sustained by culture itself. Breaking free from it does not require cruelty. It requires permission, permission to want, permission to plan, permission to protect yourself without apology attachment, permission to see power as a skill rather than a sin. And as you grant yourself that permission, something sharpens inside you, a quiet resolve, a refusal to be naive again, a willingness to carry the weight of awareness even when it isolates you. You understand now that ignorance was never innocence, it was vulnerability that benefited everyone except you. The descent is nearly complete. What remains is application, not theory, not insight, action shaped by discipline, movement guided by clarity. The final threshold is not understanding others, it is deciding what kind of force you will become once you stop lying to yourself. When theory finally collides with reality, the test is never intellectual. It is visceral. It is the moment when understanding demands action, when clarity asks for courage, when insight threatens comfort. This is where most people retreat. They prefer the illusion of knowing to the burden of doing. Machiavelli knew this weakness well. He watched men quote wisdom while living timidly, recite principles while surrendering ground inch by inch. Knowledge, he understood, is harmless until it reshapes behavior. That is when it becomes dangerous. You now stand at the edge of that danger, because once you see how power actually moves, you can no longer unsee the moments when you hand it away. The casual concession disguised as politeness, the unnecessary apology that lowers your position, the silence born not of strategy but of fear, the agreement you make to avoid tension. These are not small acts, they are habits, and habits quietly sculpt destiny. Machiavelli would tell you that power is not seized in dramatic moments alone. It is accumulated through daily posture, through how you respond to pressure, through what you tolerate, through what you enforce, through what you allow to pass without consequence. Every interaction is a negotiation of status, whether acknowledged or not. Ignoring this does not remove you from the game. It places you at a disadvantage within it. You were taught to believe that power announces itself loudly, that dominance is aggressive, that control is obvious. Machiavelli understood that the most enduring power feels unremarkable. It blends into the background. It becomes assumed. People stop questioning it not because it is justified, but because it is familiar. This is why the loss of power often feels sudden. It is not. It has been eroding invisibly for years. Look closely at how people treat you, not what they say, but what they do when it costs them something. Who respects your boundaries? Who tests them? Who listens when you speak? Who interrupts? Who remembers commitments? Who forgets? These are not personality quirks, they are signals. Machiavelli trusted signals over sentiment. You were taught to give people the benefit of the doubt. Machiavelli would advise giving them the benefit of observation. Patterns matter more than promises. Consistency matters more than intensity. Someone who violates boundaries repeatedly while apologizing eloquently is not confused. They are training you. And every time you accept the apology without consequence, you confirm the lesson. This is where discomfort sharpens, because enforcing boundaries risks conflict. It risks disapproval. It risks rupture. But Machiavelli would ask you what the alternative costs: slow erosion, quiet disrespect, invisible marginalization. Conflict avoided today becomes submission normalized tomorrow. Power does not disappear when you avoid it, it relocates. You begin to understand why Machiavelli emphasized decisiveness, not recklessness, but clarity. A decision creates reality. Hesitation invites others to decide for you. In ambiguous space, the bold define the frame. The timid adapt to it. This is not because the bold are wiser, but because they act. Action has gravity. It pulls others into its orbit. You are taught to wait until you are ready. Machiavelli knew readiness is often a luxury afforded only to those already in power. For everyone else, readiness is constructed in motion. Those who wait for perfect conditions are outpaced by those who accept imperfection and move anyway. This does not mean acting blindly. It means acting with incomplete information, knowing that hesitation is also a choice, and often the most costly one. Fear intensifies here, because acting exposes you. It removes plausible deniability. It forces you to own outcomes. Machiavelli understood that many people prefer subordination to responsibility because responsibility makes failure visible. When you are powerless, you can blame circumstance. When you act, you are accountable. Accountability terrifies those who have built identity around being good rather than being effective. Effectiveness is indifferent to intention. It judges only result. Machiavelli's world was unforgiving in this way, and so is yours, though it hides the verdict behind politeness. Opportunities go to those who take them. Influence flows to those who assert it. Respect consolidates around those who enforce standards. Others may admire your virtues, but admiration does not translate into leverage. You begin to see how often you confuse niceness with safety. Niceness delays conflict but invites disregard. Machiavelli would tell you that kindness without strength is read as permission. Strength without cruelty, however, creates clarity. People do not need to fear you to respect you. They need to know that crossing you has consequence. Consequence is not rage, it is consistency. Consistency is what most people lack. They make threats they do not enforce. They draw boundaries they do not defend. They express standards they abandon under pressure. Machiavelli saw inconsistency as an invitation. If you do not take yourself seriously, no one else will. Authority begins with self-respect made visible through action. This does not mean constant confrontation. On the contrary, constant confrontation reveals insecurity. Strategic enforcement selective. It chooses moments that establish precedent. It addresses violations early, when correction is simple. It does not accumulate resentment until it explodes. Machiavelli valued early decisive action because it prevents larger conflicts later. Delay magnifies cost. You begin to recognize how much of your exhaustion comes from tolerating what should have been addressed long ago. The unspoken resentment, the suppressed anger, the quiet compromises that hollow you out. Machiavelli would say this is the price of false peace. Peace purchased with self-betrayal is not stability, it is decay. Power also demands sacrifice, and this is where illusions about balance collapse. You were taught that you can have everything without trade-offs. Machiavelli knew this was a lie told to keep people passive. Every position costs something, every alliance requires compromise, every advancement demands risk. Those who want reward without sacrifice remain spectators. Sacrifice does not always mean loss. Often it means restraint. Not every desire must be acted upon. Not every battle must be fought. Not every truth must be spoken. Discipline is choosing long-term position over short-term relief. Machiavelli admired those who could endure discomfort now to avoid catastrophe later. This is where timing becomes lethal. Saying the right thing at the wrong moment destroys you. Saying the wrong thing at the right moment elevates you. Timing transforms meaning. Machiavelli studied timing relentlessly because it separates wisdom from luck. He watched how the same action could be praised in one context and punished in another. Morality did not change. Circumstance did. You begin to understand that courage is not loud, it is not impulsive. It is the willingness to act when silence would be safer, but submission would be permanent. Courage chooses calculated risk over guaranteed diminishment. It accepts the possibility of loss in exchange for the possibility of control. Control, however, is not domination, it is optionality, the ability to choose among outcomes rather than endure one imposed. Machiavelli valued flexibility above rigidity because flexibility preserves options. Options are power. When you have options, you negotiate. When you have none, you comply. This reframes ambition again, not as hunger for status, but as hunger for autonomy. To shape your environment rather than be shaped by it. To respond rather than react. To decide rather than be decided for. Machiavelli saw autonomy as the highest form of security. Wealth can be taken. Titles can be stripped. Influence can evaporate. But the capacity to adapt endures. You were taught to seek stability. Machiavelli would warn you that stability breeds complacency. Complacency invites disruption. Those who survive turbulence are those who anticipate it. This does not mean living in constant anxiety. It means staying alert. It means reading shifts early. It means preparing quietly while others assume permanence. Preparation is invisible. That is why it is undervalued. You do not see the hours spent observing, the alliances cultivated discreetly, the skills honed without applause. You only see the moment when someone moves decisively and call it luck. Machiavelli knew luck favors those who prepare to exploit it. This leads to a brutal realization. Many of the people you admire are not morally superior. They are strategically disciplined. They manage their energy. They choose their battles. They protect their image. They cultivate leverage. They understand that being underestimated is often an advantage, but being dismissed is fatal. They allow others to underestimate them until it is no longer useful. You begin to see how the desire to be understood has cost you, how often you explained a self instead of letting results speak, how often you sought validation instead of securing position, how often you tried to convince instead of acting. Machiavelli would tell you that persuasion is weakest when action is possible. Results silence argument. This does not mean abandoning communication. It means aligning it with strategy. Speak to shape perception, not to confess uncertainty. Share selectively. Reveal when it strengthens position. Withhold when it preserves leverage. This is not deception, it is discretion. As this sinks in, your relationship with failure changes. Failure becomes information rather than indictment. Machiavelli understood that mistakes are inevitable in action. What matters is whether you learn faster than others. Those who fear failure stagnate. Those who analyze it adapt. Shame immobilizes. Curiosity sharpens. You also begin to see why Machiavelli warned against reliance on external validation. Praise intoxicates. It dulls vigilance. It tempts you to repeat what earned applause rather than what secures position. Those who chase approval become predictable. Those who prioritize outcomes remain effective even when misunderstood. Misunderstanding is inevitable when you move strategically. People will project motives. They will fill silence with suspicion. They will resent restraint because it denies them access. Machiavelli accepted this as the cost of autonomy. Being liked by everyone is incompatible with power. Someone will always feel threatened by your clarity. This is where loneliness emerges. Strategic awareness isolates because it separates you from emotional consensus. You see dynamics others feel but cannot articulate. You anticipate shifts others deny. You hold back when others rush. This creates distance. Machiavelli knew this solitude well. He accepted it because the alternative was blindness. But solitude does not mean isolation. It means selective connection. Few allies, tested bonds, relationships built on mutual interest and respect rather than shared illusion. These alliances are quieter, stronger, and more durable. Machiavelli valued quality over quantity because crowds turn quickly. Small circles endure. As you integrate this, your posture changes subtly. You speak less, but with more weight. You promise less, but deliver more. You react slower, but decide faster. You begin to feel the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to perform virtue because they are securing position. This confidence is not arrogance. It is groundedness. You are no longer obsessed with appearing good. You are focused on being effective without becoming monstrous. This balance is delicate. Power tempts excess. Discipline restrains it. Machiavelli did not glorify cruelty. He warned against unnecessary cruelty because it breeds resistance. Strategic severity stabilizes. Indulgent brutality destroys. You begin to understand that the true test of power is not acquisition, but restraint. Can you stop when you have advantage? Can you consolidate rather than escalate? Can you maintain order without humiliating others? Machiavelli believed that those who humiliate create enemies. Those who impose limits create structure. This is where your internal work meets external reality. Mastery of self enables mastery of circumstance. Without it, Power amplifies chaos. With it, power becomes precision. You are no longer reactive, you are deliberate. And yet, one final obstacle remains: the temptation to retreat back into comfort once things stabilize, to soften vigilance, to relax standards, to believe the work is done. Machiavelli would warn you that this is the most dangerous moment. Power lost through negligence is harder to reclaim than power never gained. You are close now, not to domination but to clarity strong enough to withstand pressure. The next step is not learning more, it is deciding who you will be when tested, when compliance is rewarded and resistance is costly, when silence preserves comfort and action risks loss, when fear whispers that ignorance was easier. The final descent is not into darkness, but into responsibility, and responsibility, once accepted, cannot be returned without consequence. So now you arrive at the final threshold, not as a spectator, not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who has seen too much to pretend innocence ever again. This is the moment Machiavelli cared about most, the moment when knowledge stops being philosophical and becomes existential, when awareness demands allegiance, when you must decide whether you will return to sleep or accept the permanent burden of sight. Because once you understand how power actually works, you are no longer merely shaped by the world. You are implicated in it. You can no longer claim that you didn't know why certain people rose while others disappeared. You can no longer say you didn't see how fear was used, how narratives were weaponized, how weakness was disguised as virtue and virtue was stripped of force. You can no longer pretend that outcomes were random, that betrayal was shocking, that domination came out of nowhere. You saw the signals, you recognized the patterns, you felt the mechanisms turning beneath the surface, and that changes you. Machiavelli understood that awakening is irreversible. Once the veil lifts, you cannot willingly unsee the strings. You may wish you could. You may long for the comfort of believing that goodness alone protects, that fairness eventually prevails, that silence is safety. But comfort, once exposed as illusion, no longer soothes. It only humiliates. This is where many falter. They glimpse truth, recoil, and retreat back into moral performance, into loud condemnation, into performative innocence. They tell themselves that understanding power makes you corrupt, that strategy poisons the soul, that ignorance is purity. Machiavelli would call this cowardice disguised as conscience, not because morality is worthless, but because morality without strength is merely a story told by the powerless to survive their own fear. You now understand that the world does not punish weakness out of cruelty. It exploits it out of efficiency. Exploitation is not personal, it is structural. Wherever power is unclaimed, it is taken. Wherever boundaries are soft, they are crossed. Wherever responsibility is avoided, it is imposed from above. And you feel the weight of that truth pressing inward, because this knowledge does not ask whether you want power, it asks whether you are willing to be ruled by those who do. Machiavelli never promised that clarity would make you happy. He promised it would make you capable of choosing when others panic, capable of acting when others freeze, capable of withholding when others overshare, capable of enforcing when others plead, capable of standing alone when crowds demand submission disguised as virtue. You are no longer allowed the luxury of believing that restraint equals goodness. You now know restraint must be chosen, not inherited. That mercy must be deliberate, not reflexive. That loyalty must be earned, not assumed. That trust must be constructed, not gifted. That silence must be strategic, not fearful. You know now that power is not evil, it is indifferent. It magnifies intention. In the hands of the naive, it corrupts because it exposes unmastered desire. In the hands of the disciplined, it stabilizes because it channels force through structure. The danger was never power itself. The danger was wielding it unconsciously or being subjected to it unknowingly. And this is the line you must cross. You must decide whether you will continue performing virtue for approval, while others quietly shape your reality, or whether you will accept the loneliness of autonomy. Whether you will keep reacting emotionally to systems you do not control, or whether you will begin positioning yourself where reactions no longer define you. Whether you will keep telling yourself comforting lies about fairness, or whether you will start building leverage so fairness becomes negotiable rather than begged for. Machiavelli would not ask you to abandon empathy. He would ask you to armor it, to ensure that your compassion does not become the tool through which others disarm you. He would not ask you to become cruel. He would ask you to become precise, to stop confusing softness with safety, to stop confusing visibility with influence, to stop confusing moral certainty with strategic intelligence. You now understand that the most dangerous prison was never imposed by rulers, systems, or enemies. It was the internal cage built from shame around ambition, fear of disapproval, addiction to comfort, and refusal to see reality as it is. That cage did not need guards. You guarded it yourself. And now the door is open. Not because someone unlocked it for you, but because you finally recognized it was never locked at all. What comes next will not be cinematic. It will not be applauded. It will not be shared, celebrated, or understood by most people. It will be quiet decisions, subtle shifts, boundaries enforced without announcement, silence held without guilt, actions taken without explanation, alliances chosen without sentiment, risks calculated without drama. This is where power actually forms. You will feel the urge to explain yourself, resist it. You will feel the urge to seek validation, starve it. You will feel the urge to soften truths to remain. Liked, cut it out of you. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you reclaim ground that was stolen without your consent. The world will not thank you for this transformation. It will test you, it will provoke you, it will attempt to pull you back into legibility, into predictability, into harmlessness. People will accuse you of changing. They are right. You are no longer operating on instinct alone. You are no longer driven by fear dressed up as morality. You are no longer ignorant enough to be easily managed. And that is why this moment matters. Because from here forward, every choice is an act of authorship. Every silence is intentional. Every alliance is calculated. Every concession is conscious. You are no longer drifting through a story written by others. You are writing in ink, not pencil. Machiavelli's forbidden knowledge was never about domination for its own sake. It was about refusing to be naive in a world that rewards clarity and punishes blindness. It was about understanding that survival, influence, and autonomy require strategy, not wishful thinking. It was about becoming strong enough that your values no longer require permission to exist. So decide. Decide whether you will continue living as a reaction, or whether you will become a force. Decide whether you will keep calling ignorance peace, or whether you will carry the weight of awareness without flinching. Decide whether you will spend your life being shaped, or whether you will finally begin shaping. Because now that you have seen the game, refusing to play is still a move. And this time, you know exactly what it costs.